What would you do if you saw the same man in the same diner every Thursday night for 30 years, and he never aged a single day? Not one wrinkle, not one gray hair. The exact same face you saw when you were 32 years old, still sitting there when you turned 62. Marcus Williams thought he was losing his mind. But the truth was far more terrifying than dementia. Because when that man finally spoke to him on his last night as a truck driver, what he revealed about Jesus, about faith, and about the invisible prison Marcus had been living in for decades will shake you to your core. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this story will make you question every single prayer you've ever prayed. Now, let me take you back to that cold November night when Marcus Williams' entire reality shattered in a roadside diner in rural Tennessee. Marcus Williams had driven 2.3 million miles in his lifetime. He knew that number precisely because the company tracked it, celebrated it, put it on plaques that gathered dust in his small apartment in Tupelo, Mississippi. 30 years behind the wheel of a Peterbilt, hauling freight from Mississippi to Tennessee and back, the same route, week after week, year after year. Route 78, east, had become more familiar to him than his own reflection. He knew every pothole, every faded road sign, every mile marker. He knew where the sun would hit his windshield at exactly 6:47 in the morning during summer. He knew which rest stops had the cleanest bathrooms and which ones to avoid. And he knew, without ever consciously acknowledging it until it was too late, that he had been living the same life on repeat for 3 decades. November 14th, 2024. Marcus was 62 years old, with silver hair that had been creeping in since his early 50s, deep lines around his eyes from squinting at endless highways, and knees that screamed every time he climbed in and out of his truck. Tomorrow would be his last official day. Retirement. The word felt hollow in his mouth, like biting into fruit that looked ripe but had rotted from the inside. What was he retiring to? An empty apartment, a checking account that would cover basic needs but not dreams. No wife anymore. Lorraine had passed 5 years ago from cancer. Slowly, painfully, while Marcus prayed every night for a miracle that never came. No children. They'd never been blessed that way, though they'd tried for years. Just him, the silence, and a lifetime of unanswered questions that he'd learned to bury beneath routine and faith. Thursday nights were always the same. Marcus would leave Tupelo at 4 in the morning, drive the 247 miles to Nashville, unload at the distribution center, grab a quick meal, then make the return journey. But he never drove straight back. At exactly 11:30 p.m. every single Thursday without fail, he would pull off at exit 47 on Route 78 into a truck stop called Red's Diner and Fuel. It was a small place, the kind that had been built in the 1970s and hadn't been updated since. Red vinyl booths with duct tape covering the cracks, a jukebox in the corner that only played country songs from before 1985, and a waitress named Doreen who'd been working there almost as long as Marcus had been stopping by. Marcus would order the same thing every time. Black coffee, a slice of apple pie if they had it, cherry if they didn't. He'd sit in booth number 7, the one by the window that overlooked the parking lot, and he'd read from his worn leather Bible for exactly 20 minutes before heading back to his truck to sleep for 5 hours. It was ritual. It was comfort. It was the closest thing to church he got during the week, since Sunday services at Second Baptist back home were really the only time he allowed himself to fully stop moving, to fully stop thinking about the road ahead. But there was something else about Thursday nights at Red's Diner that Marcus had never quite processed until the very end. Something that had been there all along, sitting in plain sight, waiting for him to finally see it. Table 12, the corner booth on the opposite side of the diner, was always occupied by the same man. Always. Every single Thursday night. Marcus had been stopping at Red's since 1994, 30 years of Thursday nights, 1,560 visits to be exact, and that man had been there for every single one of them. At first, Marcus hadn't paid attention. Why would he? Truck stops were filled with regulars, people who worked nearby, drivers with similar routes, locals who had nowhere else to go late at night. The man was just part of the scenery, like Doreen or the jukebox or the smell of burnt coffee that never quite went away. But somewhere around year 10, maybe 2004 or 2005, Marcus started to feel something strange, a nagging sensation in the back of his mind, the kind you get when you know you're forgetting something important but can't quite remember what it is. The man at table 12 looked familiar, very familiar, like Marcus had known him for a long time. And that made sense, didn't it? If they'd both been coming to the same diner on the same night for a decade, of course they'd look familiar to each other. Except the man never looked at Marcus, never acknowledged him. Just sat there with his own cup of coffee, staring out the window into the darkness, completely still, almost like a photograph. Marcus would glance over occasionally, the way you do when you're in a public space and your eyes wander. And every time he looked, the man was in the exact same position, same posture, same expression, same everything. It was eerie in a way Marcus couldn't articulate, so he didn't try. He just kept reading his Bible, drinking his coffee, eating his pie, and telling himself it didn't matter. But then came year 20. 2014. Marcus was 52 years old. Lorraine had just been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, and the world felt like it was collapsing. Marcus prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. Every morning, every night, in his truck between deliveries, at church on Sundays, he begged God for healing, for mercy, for just a few more years with the woman he'd loved since he was 19 years old. And every Thursday night at Red's Diner, he would sit in booth 7 with his Bible open to whatever passage the pastor had preached about that week, and he would read it over and over, searching for comfort, searching for answers, searching for some sign that God was listening. And that's when Marcus first consciously noticed it. The wrongness, the impossibility. He looked up from his Bible one Thursday night, tears still wet on his face from reading Psalm 23 and thinking about Lorraine's frail body wasting away in a hospital bed. And his eyes landed on the man at table 12. The man was looking out the window, same as always. But something clicked in Marcus's brain, a recognition that went beyond familiarity. This wasn't just someone he'd seen regularly for 20 years. This was the exact same man he'd seen 20 years ago. Exactly the same. Not similar. Not a strong resemblance. Identical. Marcus blinked hard, wiped his eyes, told himself he was just exhausted and grief-stricken and seeing things that weren't there. But the thought had taken root. And once you see something, truly see it, you can't unsee it. Over the next few months, as Lorraine's condition worsened and Marcus felt himself drowning in helplessness, he started paying closer attention on Thursday nights. He would sneak glances at table 12, trying to be subtle, trying to convince himself he was wrong. But he wasn't wrong. The man never changed. Not his hair, which was dark brown without a single strand of gray. Not his face, which was smooth and unlined. Not his clothes, which were always the same simple jeans and dark jacket. Not even his coffee cup, which seemed to stay full no matter how long he sat there. Marcus tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the man's son who looked just like him and had inherited his father's routine. But no, that didn't make sense, because there was never any variation, Never a different person? Never an older or younger version? Just him, always him. Or maybe Marcus was misremembering what the man had looked like 20 years ago. Memory is fallible, especially over such a long period. Maybe the man had aged normally, and Marcus just hadn't noticed the gradual changes. But deep down, in a place Marcus didn't want to acknowledge, he knew that wasn't true either. There was something deeply, fundamentally wrong about the man at table 12. Lorraine died in March of 2015. Marcus held her hand as she took her last breath. And the only thing he could think about, beyond the crushing grief, was how angry he was at God. 43 years of faithful service. 43 years of tithing, of Sunday services, of Wednesday night Bible study, of singing in the choir. And for what? For unanswered prayers? For watching his wife suffer and waste away despite every desperate plea Marcus had lifted up to heaven? He didn't stop believing. He couldn't. Faith was woven too deeply into the fabric of who he was. But something broke inside him that day. Something that never quite healed. And the Thursday nights continued. Marcus kept driving, kept stopping at Red's Diner, kept sitting in booth 7 with his Bible and his coffee. But now, when he looked at the man at table 12, there was something else mixed in with the confusion. There was anger, resentment, because this man, whoever or whatever he was, seemed untouched by time, untouched by pain, untouched by loss. He just sat there, night after night, year after year, while Marcus aged and suffered and buried his wife and wondered why God had abandoned him. But Marcus never spoke to him, never approached him, never asked the questions that were building up like pressure behind a dam. Because what would he even say? "Excuse me, sir, but have you been sitting in this exact spot for 25 years without aging?" It sounded insane. It was insane. So Marcus kept his distance, kept his questions to himself, and tried to focus on just getting through each day, each week, each endless mile of highway that led nowhere but back to the beginning. The years blurred together after Lorraine died. 2016, 2017, 2018. Marcus turned 60. His back got worse. His hearing started to fade. He needed reading glasses for his Bible now. He watched his reflection in truck stop bathroom mirrors and barely recognized the old man staring back at him. Where had the time gone? Where had his life gone? He'd spent 3 decades driving in circles, literally and figuratively. And what did he have to show for it? A paid-off apartment full of furniture that no one would want. A pension that would cover beans and rice. And a hollowness inside that no amount of prayer seemed to fill. But the man at table 12 never changed. Marcus was obsessed with it now, though he'd never admit it out loud. Every Thursday night, he would time his glances, trying to catch the man doing something different, something human. But there was nothing. No fidgeting, no checking a phone, no conversation with Doreen when she refilled his coffee. Just stillness, watchfulness, as if the man was waiting for something specific, something that hadn't happened yet. Marcus started having dreams about the man. Strange, vivid dreams where the diner was empty except for the 2 of them, and the man would finally turn his head and look directly at Marcus with eyes that were too knowing, too ancient. In the dreams, Marcus would try to speak, but no sound would come out, and the man would just smile sadly and shake his head, as if to say, "Not yet." Marcus would wake up in his truck, heart pounding, convinced that he was losing his mind. Maybe this was what happened when you got old and lonely. Maybe your brain started inventing mysteries to fill the emptiness. But it wasn't his imagination. Marcus knew that with a certainty that defied logic. Something was wrong with time itself in that diner, or at least with the man at table 12, and Marcus wasn't the only one who'd noticed, though it took him until year 28 to figure that out. One Thursday night in September of 2022, Doreen brought Marcus his coffee and lingered by his booth longer than usual, wiping down the already clean table with a rag that had seen better days. She was in her late 60s now, her hair completely white, her movements slower than they used to be. "You ever wonder about him?" she said quietly, jerking her chin toward table 12. Marcus's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Doreen leaned in closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been working here 34 years, Marcus. I've seen you come in every Thursday for 28 of those years, and he's been sitting in that same booth every single one of those nights. Never ages, never changes, never orders anything except coffee. And here's the thing that really gets me." She paused, her eyes worried. "I've never, not once, seen him arrive or leave. He's always just there when I start my shift at 10 p.m., and he's always gone by the time I leave at 2 a.m. But I never see him walk in or walk out. You tell me that's normal." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Maybe he comes in right before your shift and leaves right after? For 34 years? Same exact timing every single week? Never even 1 minute off? Doreen shook her head. "My husband thinks I'm crazy. Says I'm mixing up different customers in my memory. But I'm not. I know what I've seen, or what I haven't seen." She straightened up, glancing nervously at table 12. "I'm telling you, Marcus, there's something not right about that man. I've been wanting to say something to you for years, but I was afraid you'd think I'd lost my marbles." After Doreen walked away, Marcus couldn't focus on his Bible. He sat there staring at the same verse for 20 minutes without absorbing a single word, his mind racing. Someone else had seen it. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't imagining things. Whatever was happening with the man at table 12, it was real enough that another person had independently noticed the same impossible details. That should have brought comfort, validation. Instead, it made everything worse. Because if it was real, then what did that mean? Who was this man? What was he? The questions haunted Marcus through the final 2 years of his career. He would lie awake in his truck on Thursday nights after leaving Red's diner, staring at the ceiling, running through possibilities that ranged from barely plausible to absolutely insane. Maybe it was some kind of medical condition that made the man age very slowly. Maybe he'd had extensive plastic surgery. Maybe he was actually a series of different men who all looked identical and followed the same routine to mess with people. None of the explanations worked. None of them accounted for the totality of the wrongness that radiated from table 12. And then came November 14th, 2024, the last Thursday before Marcus's official retirement, his final night on the road. He almost didn't stop at Red's. Part of him wanted to just drive straight through, go home, end this chapter of his life without looking back. But routine is a powerful thing, especially when it's been carved into your bones for 30 years. So at 11:30 p.m., Marcus took exit 47 one last time, pulled into the parking lot of Red's diner, and walked through the door that had welcomed him 1,560 times before. The diner was quieter than usual. Only 2 other customers besides Marcus and the man at table 12. Doreen wasn't working. There was a younger waitress Marcus didn't recognize. He ordered his coffee and sat in booth 7, but he didn't pull out his Bible. Instead, he just stared out the window at his truck, at the road beyond, at the life he was leaving behind. 30 years, 2.3 million miles. And what had any of it meant? He'd provided for Lorraine while she was alive. That was something. He'd been a good husband, a faithful church member, a reliable employee. But he'd never made a real difference. Never changed anything. Never broken free from the cycle of wake up, drive, pray, sleep, repeat. His father had worked in a factory for 40 years. Same routine, same emptiness. His grandfather had worked in the cotton fields before that. Same cycle, different setting. 4 generations of Williams men, all living slight variations of the same trapped existence. You've finally seen it, haven't you? Marcus jumped so hard his knee hit the underside of the table, sloshing coffee over the rim of his cup. The voice had come from right beside him, soft and gentle, but carrying a weight that made the air feel heavy. He turned his head, and there, standing next to booth 7, was the man from table 12. Up close, he was even more unsettling. His face was smooth but somehow ancient, his eyes dark and infinitely deep, his presence radiating something that Marcus's mind couldn't quite categorize. Not threatening, exactly, but overwhelming, like standing too close to something vast. Seen what? Marcus managed to croak out, his mouth suddenly dry. The man gestured to the empty seat across from Marcus. May I? Marcus nodded, unable to form words. The man slid into the booth with a fluid grace that seemed practiced over countless repetitions, and folded his hands on the table. They were ordinary hands. No extra fingers, no strange colors, nothing obviously inhuman. But Marcus found he couldn't look directly at them for more than a second. Something about the man made direct observation difficult, like trying to look at the sun. You've been watching me for 30 years, the man said. It wasn't a question. And for the last 10 years, you've been noticing that something is wrong, that I haven't changed, that I haven't aged, that I'm the same now as I was when you first sat in this diner in 1994. Who are you? Marcus whispered. The man smiled, and it was a sad smile, full of a compassion that made Marcus's chest ache. I've had many names, many forms, but what I am is more important than who. I'm an observer, Marcus, a witness. I've been watching you, yes, but not just you. Your father, too, and his father before him. 4 generations of Williams men, all driving the same road, living the same cycle, dying with the same unanswered questions. Marcus felt his breathing quicken. That's impossible. You can't have known my great-grandfather. He died in 1951. I was there, the man said simply. Different diner, same road, same pattern. Your great-grandfather used to stop at a place called Morton's on Highway 61. Every Saturday night for 32 years. I sat in the back corner and watched him pray over the same Bible you carry now. He passed it to your grandfather, who passed it to your father, who passed it to you. 4 generations, 1 Bible, and 1 endless cycle that none of you have ever broken. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He wanted to stand up, walk away, dismiss this as insanity or a cruel prank. But he couldn't move. He was pinned in place by the terrible certainty that every word the man spoke was true. What do you want from me? I don't want anything from you, Marcus, the man said gently. I'm here because you're ready. Finally, after 30 years of stopping in this diner, after 3 decades of the same routine, the same prayers, the same disappointments, you're ready to see the truth. And tonight, on your last night as a driver, on your last night of the cycle, you've earned the right to know what's been stolen from you. Stolen? Marcus echoed. What are you talking about? The man leaned forward, and his eyes seemed to expand, to fill Marcus's entire field of vision. Everything you were taught about faith, about God, about Jesus and prayer and salvation. All of it carefully constructed to keep you exactly where you are. Powerless, dependent, trapped in a cycle of seeking but never finding, asking but never receiving, believing but never experiencing. You've prayed for 30 years, Marcus. Thousands of prayers. Tens of thousands. And how many have been answered? Marcus felt his throat tighten. Faith isn't about getting what you want. It's about submission to God's will. Is it? The man asked softly. Or is that just what they taught you so you wouldn't question why your prayers disappear into silence? Tell me, Marcus. What did Jesus actually teach about prayer? Do you remember his words? Marcus's hand automatically went to his Bible, the worn leather familiar under his fingers. He said to ask and it will be given, to seek and you'll find, to knock and the door will be opened. Yes, the man said. Ask and receive, not ask and wait, not ask and submit, not ask and accept whatever scraps might fall from God's table. Ask and receive, immediately, powerfully, with certainty, because Jesus understood something that was systematically erased from his teachings within a few generations of his death. He understood that you are not separate from God. You are not a powerless child begging a distant father for help. You are a creator, Marcus. You are made of the same consciousness that creates galaxies and orchestrates quantum fields. And when you speak with absolute faith, without doubt, without the poison of unworthiness that religion has injected into your soul, reality itself bends to accommodate your words. Marcus shook his head, feeling panic rising in his chest. That's not Christianity. That's some kind of New Age nonsense. Jesus was the Son of God. I'm just a man, a sinner. And there it is, the man said, his voice infinitely sad. The programming, the chains. Jesus never called you a sinner, Marcus. He called you a child of God. He said, you are God's. He said, these things I do, you will do also, and greater things. He said, the kingdom of heaven is within you, not above you, not separate from you, within you. But that message was too dangerous. People who know their own power don't need priests to intercede, don't need elaborate rituals, don't need institutions to grant them access to the divine. So the message was changed. Jesus became unique instead of an example. Miracles became supernatural instead of natural applications of universal law, and faith became passive waiting instead of active creation. No, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Because somewhere deep inside, in a place he'd been ignoring for decades, something was recognizing truth in the man's words. If that were true, I would have healed Lorraine. I would have saved her. The man's expression softened even further. You prayed for her healing every day for 2 years, thousands of prayers, and every single one of those prayers came from the same consciousness: fear, desperation, unworthiness, and doubt. You begged God to do something you believed you couldn't do yourself. You approached prayer as a helpless victim asking a distant authority for mercy. And the universe, which responds precisely to the consciousness you emit, gave you exactly what you were vibrating: helplessness, separation, and loss. Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now, hot and bitter. So you're saying I killed her? That her death was my fault because I didn't pray right? No, the man said firmly. I'm saying you were never taught how to pray at all. You were taught a cargo cult imitation of prayer, ritual without understanding, words without power, the form of faith without the substance. Jesus didn't beg God to heal people, Marcus. He spoke with absolute authority and certainty. He said, "Be healed," and they were healed. He said, "Rise and walk," and they walked. He said, "Your faith has made you whole." Because he understood that the faith wasn't in an external deity granting favors. The faith was in the person's own divine nature, awakening to its creative power. Marcus slumped back against the booth, feeling like the bones had been removed from his body. Everything the man was saying contradicted 43 years of religious teaching, but it also explained 43 years of unanswered prayers, 43 years of feeling abandoned by a God who supposedly loved him, 43 years of watching good people suffer while being told it was all part of some mysterious divine plan. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked hoarsely. "Why now?" "Because the cycle ends with you," the man said. "Your great-grandfather died without knowing. Your grandfather died without knowing. Your father died without knowing. They all lived the same trapped existence, praying to a God who seemed silent because they were speaking the wrong language, because they had been deliberately taught the wrong language. But you, Marcus, you've reached the end of the cycle. Tomorrow you retire. Tomorrow the road that has defined your life for 30 years comes to an end. And in that ending, there's an opportunity for beginning, for breaking the pattern, for finally learning what Jesus actually taught before churches built empires on the ruins of his message." Marcus looked down at his Bible, the leather worn smooth by 4 generations of William's men. "What did he teach?" The man reached across the table and gently placed his hand over Marcus's Bible. The moment he made contact, the air in the diner seemed to shimmer, to become somehow more real and less real at the same time. Jesus taught that you are not in the world. The world is in you. Consciousness doesn't emerge from matter. Matter emerges from consciousness. When he said, "I and the Father are one," he wasn't claiming exclusive divinity. He was stating universal truth. You and the Father are one. You and the creative force that spins galaxies are one. And when you speak from that understanding, from that certainty, from that complete absence of doubt, you don't pray for things to change. You declare that they are changed. You don't ask the universe to heal you. You command your cells to align with perfect health. You don't hope for abundance. You recognize that abundance is your natural state and scarcity is the illusion. But the churches, Marcus protested weakly. The pastors, they study the Bible for years. Are you saying they're all wrong? I'm saying they're teaching what they were taught. A religion about Jesus instead of the path of Jesus. They've made him into an idol to worship instead of an example to follow. They tell you to have faith like a child, which they interpret as blind acceptance. But children don't have blind acceptance. Children have absolute certainty. A child believes completely in their imagination, in their desires, in their inherent worthiness. They haven't yet learned the doubt and unworthiness that religion specializes in teaching. Jesus said to be like a child because children haven't yet been programmed to deny their own creative power. The shimmer in the air intensified, and Marcus felt something shifting in his perception. The diner was still. The diner, the booth, still the booth. But somehow he was seeing it all differently, as if a filter he'd never known existed had been removed from his eyes. "What are you?" he asked again. "I told you. An observer. A witness. There are many of us, Marcus, spread across your world, watching the patterns, watching the cycles, waiting for the moments when someone is ready to break free. We don't interfere. We don't force. We simply offer truth to those who have earned the right to hear it through their own questioning, their own suffering, their own persistence. You've been stopping at this diner for 30 years. You've been seeing me, but not seeing me, because you weren't ready to see. But tonight, something in you finally cracked open. The grief, the anger, the decades of disappointment. They've created a space where truth can enter. Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand. If what you're saying is true, if we really have that kind of power, why doesn't everyone know? Why are there still churches teaching the old way? The man's expression grew darker. Because power is control, and institutions are built on control. If people knew they could heal themselves, the medical industry collapses. If people knew they could manifest abundance, the entire economic system that depends on scarcity collapses. If people knew they had direct access to the divine, churches collapse. The greatest secret ever kept isn't about aliens or conspiracies or hidden technology. It's about human potential. It's about what Jesus actually demonstrated and tried to teach before his message was weaponized into a control system. But Jesus died for our sins, Marcus said. The words automatic, programmed by decades of repetition. He sacrificed himself to save us. Did he? The man asked quietly. Or was he murdered by the same kind of religious and political powers that didn't want people to know their own divinity? Jesus taught liberation, freedom, direct access to creative power, and he was killed for it. Then, within a few generations, the people who claimed to follow him built the exact system he was trying to dismantle. They made him into a distant savior instead of a present example. They made salvation into something you receive after death instead of something you embody now. They made faith into waiting instead of creating. It was brilliant, really. Take the most dangerous revolutionary message ever taught and transform it into the ultimate pacification program. Marcus felt like he was falling, like the booth beneath him was dissolving, like everything solid in his world had turned to water. I don't know if I can believe this. I don't know if I can accept it. I'm not asking you to believe anything, the man said. I'm offering you an experiment, a test. Jesus said you would know the truth by its fruits, so test it. Tomorrow, when you wake up in your apartment as a retired man, with an empty day ahead of you and a lifetime of disappointment behind you, try something different. Don't pray, declare, don't ask, command. Pick something small, something specific, and speak it into existence with absolute certainty. Not hope, not wish, certainty. Feel it as already done. See it as already real. Thank the universe for it as if it's already manifested. And watch what happens. Like what? Marcus asked. What should I declare? The man smiled. That's for you to decide. But make it something that would prove the principle. Something unlikely enough that it can't be dismissed as coincidence, but simple enough that you can hold the certainty without doubt creeping in. Jesus started with water into wine, then moved to healing, then to raising the dead. Start small. Build your certainty. Prove to yourself that the universe isn't something that happens to you. It's something you happen to. The shimmer in the air was fading now, and the diner was becoming solid again. The man stood up from the booth, and Marcus felt panic surge through him. Wait, I don't even know your name. How do I find you again? You don't need to find me, Marcus, the man said gently. This is the only time we'll speak. I've delivered the message I was sent to deliver. The rest is up to you. You can dismiss this as a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. You can go back to your old prayers and your old patterns. You can live out your retirement the same way your father lived out his and his father before him. The cycle will accept you back without judgment. He paused, his ancient eyes holding Marcus's gaze. or you can break it. You can finally become what Jesus was trying to teach humans they could be. Conscious creators, divine expressions, not victims of fate, but authors of reality. But what if I fail? Marcus whispered. What if I try and nothing happens? The man placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, and the touch carried a warmth that seemed to penetrate all the way to Marcus's bones. Then you fail, then you learn, then you adjust and try again. Jesus didn't manifest perfectly every time. He had to grow into his power. He had to learn. He had to practice. The difference between him and everyone else wasn't some supernatural advantage. It was that he kept practicing until he mastered the principles, until his certainty was absolute, until he knew, beyond any possibility of doubt, that he and the Father were one, and that meant all creative power was available to him. The man walked away then, moving toward the door, and Marcus watched him go with a strange mixture of terror and hope churning in his chest. At the door, the man paused and looked back. One more thing, Marcus. The cycle that trapped your family for 4 generations. It wasn't unique to you. It's everywhere. Billions of people trapped in loops of powerlessness, taught to be victims, taught to wait for salvation, taught that their desires are somehow selfish or sinful. Every time someone breaks free, they weaken the system. They create a crack that makes it easier for the next person. Your great-grandfather couldn't break free. Your grandfather couldn't. Your father couldn't. But you can. And when you do, you won't just save yourself. You'll break the cycle for everyone who comes after you. Then he was gone. Not walking out the door, just gone. One moment present, the next absent, as if he'd simply decided to stop existing in that location. Marcus sat alone in booth 7 with his cold coffee and his worn Bible and his entire worldview crumbling around him. The young waitress came by to refill his cup, and Marcus asked her about the man at table 12. She looked confused. What man? There hasn't been anyone at table 12 all night. Just you and the couple by the door. Marcus drove home in a daze. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. He sat in his apartment as dawn broke over Tupelo and tried to process what had happened. Had it been real? Had he finally snapped under the weight of grief and loneliness and disappointment? Or had something genuinely impossible occurred in a roadside diner on Route 78? He opened his Bible to the Gospels and started reading with new eyes. And everywhere he looked, he saw it. The pattern the man had described. Jesus teaching people to have faith in themselves, in their own divine nature, in their creative power. If you have faith and do not doubt, you can say to this mountain, "Be removed and cast into the sea," and it will be done. Not God will do it. You will do it. These things I do, you will do also. And greater things than these will you do. Not God will do through you. You will do. The kingdom of God is within you. Not above, not external. Within. Marcus spent the entire day reading, cross-referencing, letting the words he'd read 1,000 times before reveal meanings he'd never seen. And the more he read, the more he felt something shifting inside him. Not belief, exactly, but possibility. A crack in the certainty that he was powerless, that he was separate, that he was dependent on external forces for every good thing in his life. That night, sitting in his apartment with the Bible open on his lap, Marcus decided to try the experiment. Something small, something specific. He thought for a long time about what to choose, and finally settled on something that would be undeniable if it worked. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had a grandson who'd been in prison for 3 years. She talked about him constantly, how he'd been caught selling drugs, how he'd made mistakes, but was a good kid at heart. She never got to visit him because the prison was 5 states away, and she didn't have money for travel. Marcus had heard her crying through the walls more than once, praying for her grandson to be transferred somewhere closer. Marcus closed his eyes. He didn't pray in the traditional sense, didn't ask, didn't beg. Instead, he did what the man had instructed. He declared. He spoke with as much certainty as he could muster, which wasn't much, but it was something. Mrs. Patterson's grandson is transferred to a facility within 2 hours of Tupelo. It is done. It is already real. I give thanks for this manifestation. He felt ridiculous saying it, felt like a fool, but he also felt something else. A tiny flutter of possibility, a whisper of what if. 3 days later, Mrs. Patterson knocked on his door, her face glowing with joy, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Marcus, you won't believe it. Timothy is being transferred. They called me this morning. He's coming to the federal facility in Oxford, less than 90 minutes from here." After 3 years of begging, 3 years of paperwork and denials, suddenly they approved it. They said a spot opened up unexpectedly. I can see my grandson, Marcus. I can actually see him. She hugged him, sobbing with relief, and Marcus stood there in his doorway, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. Coincidence? Maybe. Possibly. Probably. But Marcus thought about the man's words. Start small. Build certainty. So he tried again. This time something for himself. His left knee had been causing him severe pain for 2 years. He'd seen doctors. They'd recommended surgery, but Medicare wouldn't fully cover it, and Marcus couldn't afford the out-of-pocket costs. He'd learned to live with the pain, popping ibuprofen like candy and moving carefully. That night, Marcus placed his hand on his knee and spoke to his own body with the same declarative certainty. This knee is healed. The pain is gone. Perfect function is restored. It is done. And he felt it. For just a moment, a warmth in his knee, a tingling sensation, as if something was being repaired at a level deeper than tissue. The next morning, Marcus woke up and stood up, and there was no pain, not reduced pain, no pain. He walked around his apartment, testing it, waiting for the familiar ache. Nothing. He went for a walk around his neighborhood, something he hadn't been able to do in months without severe discomfort. Still nothing. He broke into a jog just for a few seconds, and his knee held perfectly. And that's when Marcus began to believe. Not fully, not completely, but enough to keep trying. Over the next few months, Marcus became a student of what the man had called universal law. He tested it carefully, methodically. Small manifestations, specific declarations. And they worked, not every time, not perfectly, but enough times, in enough specific ways, that coincidence became statistically impossible. He manifested a free repair when his car broke down, a job offer for a neighbor who'd been unemployed for 6 months, unexpected money that arrived in the form of a refund he'd forgotten about. Each success built his certainty. Each success weakened the decades of programming that had taught him he was powerless. And as his certainty grew, so did his understanding. He began to see the cycles everywhere. Not just in his own family, but in his community, in his church, in society at large. People trapped in patterns of lack, taught to accept it as God's will. People praying for change, but vibrating fear and doubt. People waiting for external salvation instead of recognizing their own creative power. He saw it in Second Baptist, where the same families had been struggling financially for generations while faithfully tithing to a church with a multi-million-dollar building fund. He saw it in the prayers, always asking, always begging, never declaring, never commanding, Marcus tried to share what he'd learned. Carefully, gently. He mentioned it to his pastor during a counseling session, suggesting that maybe prayer could be approached differently, more actively. The pastor smiled kindly and told him that what he was describing sounded like prosperity gospel heresy. Marcus tried to explain to his choir friends that Jesus' teachings about faith might have been more literal than metaphorical. They nodded politely and changed the subject. He even wrote a letter to his cousin in Atlanta, the one who'd been praying for her autistic son's healing for a decade. She wrote back saying she appreciated his concern, but she was putting her trust in God's timing, not human manipulation. The rejection hurt, but Marcus understood it. He'd been part of the system for 43 years. He knew how deep the programming went. People didn't want to believe they had power because power meant responsibility. It was easier to be a victim of circumstances, to blame God or fate or bad luck when life didn't go well. Taking responsibility for your reality, recognizing that your consciousness creates your experience, that was terrifying. It meant every failure, every disappointment, every tragedy was somehow connected to your own vibration, your own certainty or lack thereof. But Marcus also knew it meant something else. It meant freedom, real freedom, not the freedom promised after death, but freedom now. Freedom to shape your life, freedom to create, freedom to break cycles that had lasted generations. He thought often about what the man had said, that breaking his family's cycle would weaken the system, make it easier for others. Marcus didn't know if that was true, but he knew he couldn't go back. He couldn't unknow what he now understood. A year after his retirement, Marcus was sitting in his apartment reading when he heard shouting from the street below. He looked out the window and saw Mrs. Patterson arguing with two police officers in front of her apartment. Her grandson Timothy had been released on parole 2 weeks earlier and was living with her while he got back on his feet. Marcus watched the scene unfold, watched Mrs. Patterson's fear and anger, and he made a decision. He went downstairs, walked calmly into the situation, and simply declared, "There's been a misunderstanding. These officers are going to verify the information and realize everything is in order. This situation resolves peacefully right now." He didn't shout it, didn't make demands, just stated it with quiet, absolute certainty. And something in his voice, or in his presence, or in the frequency he was emitting, shifted the energy of the entire encounter. The officers looked at him, looked at each other, made a phone call, and within 10 minutes they were apologizing to Mrs. Patterson and leaving. Timothy, standing behind his grandmother with his hands shaking, stared at Marcus like he'd just witnessed magic. "How did you do that?" he asked. Marcus smiled. "I'm still learning myself, but I'm starting to understand what Jesus actually meant when he said we have power. Not power over others, power with reality itself." That moment sparked something. Timothy started asking questions, lots of questions, about faith, about consciousness, about creation and manifestation. Marcus shared what he'd learned, what he was still learning. And Timothy, who'd spent 3 years in prison with nothing but time to think and question, absorbed it like a man dying of thirst. Within a month, Timothy had manifested a job at a local garage, despite having a criminal record that made employment nearly impossible. Within 2 months, he'd reconciled with his estranged daughter. Within 3, he'd saved enough money to rent his own apartment. Mrs. Patterson noticed. Other neighbors noticed. And slowly, carefully, Marcus began sharing the principles with anyone who was ready to hear them. Not preaching, not pushing, just living the truth and allowing others to observe the results. His knee remained pain-free. His finances improved dramatically, not through windfalls, but through unexpected opportunities and solutions. His health, which had been declining for years, stabilized and then improved. People saw the changes. Some dismissed them as luck, but others asked questions. Marcus started a small study group in his apartment. Just 5 people at first, then 8, then 12. They went through the Gospels together, reading Jesus' words with fresh eyes, stripping away centuries of institutional interpretation. They practiced declaring instead of begging. They worked on building certainty instead of hope. They learned to feel gratitude for manifestations before they appeared in physical reality. And they got results. Not perfect, not always, but enough to prove the principle. The pastor at Second Baptist asked Marcus to stop holding the meetings, said it was divisive, that it contradicted church teaching. Marcus respectfully declined. He had no intention of starting a new church or competing with the existing one. But he also had no intention of hiding the truth that had set him free. The pastor warned that Marcus might face consequences. Marcus smiled and told him that he understood and that he loved him regardless of disagreement. Some people from Second Baptist stopped speaking to Marcus. Others left the church entirely to join his study group. Marcus felt sad about the division, but understood it was inevitable. Systems don't change easily. Power structures don't surrender control willingly. But individuals can break free, one at a time, and each one who does makes it easier for the next. 2 years after his encounter in the diner, Marcus was leading a study group of 37 people. They met in a rented community center now, his apartment too small for the numbers. They came from all backgrounds, different churches, different denominations, some who'd never been religious at all. What united them was a hunger for truth and a willingness to test principles rather than just believe doctrines. They called themselves the Awakened, though Marcus hated the name. It sounded arrogant. But they'd voted, and he'd been outnumbered. And Marcus kept learning, kept practicing, kept pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He manifested healing for others now, placing his hands on people and declaring their wellness with such certainty that symptoms disappeared. Not every time. Not every one. Some people's doubt was too strong, their programming too deep. But enough times that it couldn't be explained away. He manifested solutions to problems that seemed unsolvable. He manifested connections between people who needed each other. He manifested resources that appeared from unexpected sources. But the most profound manifestation was internal. The loneliness that had haunted him since Lorraine's death was gone. Because he'd found someone new. Though he'd made peace with the possibility of companionship if it came. But because he no longer felt separate. From God, from the universe, from other people. He felt connected to everything, part of an infinite creative consciousness that was expressing itself through billions of forms. He felt Lorraine's presence sometimes, not as a ghost, but as a frequency. And he understood that death wasn't the end of consciousness, just a transition in form. He thought often about the man from the diner, wondered who or what he really was, wondered if there were others like him, scattered across the world, delivering similar messages to people who were ready. Marcus had tried to find him, had driven back to Red's diner several times, but the man never appeared again. Doreen confirmed that she'd never seen him after that night. The younger waitress still insisted he'd never been there at all. Marcus didn't know what that meant. Didn't know if the encounter had been physical or something else. But it didn't matter. The message had been real. The results were real. The freedom was real. On the 3rd anniversary of his retirement, Marcus stood in front of his study group and told them the full story about the diner, about the man, about the cycle that had trapped 4 generations of his family, about the choice he'd been given and the experiment that had proven the principles true. Some people were skeptical. Some thought he'd imagined it. But most understood that the specifics didn't matter. What mattered was the truth being demonstrated, the lives being transformed, the cycles being broken. Marcus was 65 years old now. His hair completely white, his face lined with years of living. But he felt younger than he had in decades, more alive, more purposeful. He'd spent 30 years driving in circles, trapped in a cycle of powerlessness and disappointment. Now he was helping others break their own cycles, teaching them what Jesus had actually taught. Not religion, not ritual, not blind faith in external authorities, but conscious creation, divine power, the kingdom of heaven within. He knew there would be opposition. Already some churches in Tupelo were preaching against his group, calling them heretics, warning their congregations away. Already some family members had stopped speaking to people who attended his meetings. Already there were whispers about cults and brainwashing. Marcus expected it. Systems always fight back when their control is threatened. But the truth was spreading too fast now. Too many people getting results. Too many lives changing. Too many cycles breaking. And Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The man had said there were others like him, other observers waiting for people to be ready. That meant this wasn't happening just in Tupelo. It was happening everywhere. A global awakening. A remembering of what humanity had forgotten. A reclamation of the power that had been stolen through centuries of institutional control. Jesus had tried to deliver this message 2,000 years ago. He'd been killed for it. But the message couldn't be killed. It could only be buried. And now, after 2 millennia of darkness, it was being unearthed. Marcus stood at his apartment window on a Thursday night, looking out over Tupelo, thinking about the road. Route 78, the highway he'd driven 1,000,000 times, the cycle he'd lived without knowing, the diner where everything changed. He wondered about his great-grandfather, sitting in Morton's every Saturday, praying over the same Bible. He wondered what would have happened if the man had spoken to him, if he'd been ready, if the cycle had been broken 3 generations earlier. But he also understood that timing was everything. His great-grandfather hadn't been ready. His grandfather hadn't been ready. His father hadn't been ready. But Marcus had been ready. And his readiness had come from their suffering, from their unanswered prayers, from their entire lives spent in the cycle. They had paid the price for his awakening. And he would honor that by making sure their great-great-grandchildren never had to repeat the pattern. There was a soft knock on his door. Marcus turned from the window and opened it to find Timothy standing there, Mrs. Patterson's grandson, now 27 years old and looking healthier than he had in years. "Marcus, we need to talk. Something happened today." Marcus invited him in, made coffee, and listened as Timothy told him about an experience he'd had that afternoon. He'd been working at the garage when a man came in with a car that needed complex electrical work. Timothy had diagnosed the problem quickly, something that should have taken hours. When he explained the issue to the customer, the man had looked at him strangely and asked, "How long have you been doing this?" Timothy had replied honestly that he'd only been a mechanic for 2 years. The man had smiled and said, "You have a gift. You're seeing beyond the physical. Keep developing that." Timothy had been unnerved by the comment. But then, as he was working on the car, he'd felt his hands being guided, as if something was showing him exactly where to look, exactly what to do. The repair had taken 15 minutes instead of hours. And when he'd looked up to find the customer, the man was gone, had paid, left his keys, and disappeared without Timothy noticing. Marcus, I think it was one of them, one of those observers you talked about. I think they're watching me now. Marcus felt his chest tighten with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. What did he look like? Timothy described him. Nothing particularly unusual, except for the eyes. They were old, Marcus. Really old. Like he'd seen everything. Like the man you described from the diner. Marcus nodded slowly. It was beginning. The observers were making contact with others. The awakening was accelerating. He thought about what the man had said about cycles, about how breaking one made it easier for the next person. Timothy had broken free in 2 years. It had taken Marcus 30. And Timothy's children, if he had any, might break free in 2 months. And their children might never be trapped at all. Over the next year, Marcus heard similar stories from others in his study group. Brief encounters with people who seemed to know more than they should, who spoke in ways that shattered old beliefs and revealed new possibilities, who appeared at exactly the right moment and then disappeared. The observers were everywhere, Marcus realized, and they'd always been everywhere. But only those who were ready could see them. Only those who'd earned the right through their own questioning, their own suffering, their own persistence in seeking truth despite every obstacle. Marcus was approached by people from other cities who'd heard about his group. They wanted to start similar groups in their communities. Marcus helped where he could, sharing what he'd learned, offering guidance. But he was careful to emphasize that he wasn't starting a new religion, wasn't creating a new hierarchy, wasn't replacing one control system with another. Each group needed to be autonomous. Each person needed to discover their own power. Each community needed to find its own way. The point wasn't to create followers. It was to create more leaders, more creators, more people who understood their divine nature. By his 4th year post-retirement, Marcus was receiving letters and emails from around the country. People sharing their own experiences, their own encounters with observers, their own awakening to the truth that Jesus had tried to teach. The movement, if it could be called that, had no name, no central organization, no hierarchy. It was organic, viral, spreading through word of mouth and demonstrated results. And it was growing faster than Marcus had ever imagined possible. He received a letter one day from a woman in Oregon. She'd been part of a strict fundamentalist church her entire life. She'd prayed every day for 20 years for her chronic illness to be healed. The illness had only worsened. Then she'd encountered a man in a coffee shop who told her she was praying wrong. He taught her the principles Marcus was teaching. Within a month, her symptoms had begun to reverse. Within 6 months, her doctors were calling it an inexplicable remission. She'd tried to tell her church what had happened. They'd told her it was either a medical misdiagnosis or the devil's deception. She'd left the church, started her own study group. And now she was writing to Marcus to thank him for helping her understand that leaving her church didn't mean leaving God. It meant finally finding God, the real God, not the angry, distant, capricious deity of institutional religion, but the infinite creative consciousness that she was part of and always had been. Marcus pinned her letter on his wall next to dozens of others, testimonies of transformation, of cycles broken, of lives reclaimed. He looked at them sometimes when doubt crept in, when he wondered if he'd somehow led people astray, when the weight of responsibility felt too heavy. And he would remember the man from the diner. Remember the certainty in those ancient eyes. Remember the truth that had been spoken. you're not just saving yourself. You're breaking the cycle for everyone who comes after you. Marcus Williams died at age 71, 8 years after his retirement, 9 years after his encounter in the diner. He died peacefully in his sleep, his heart simply stopping between one breath and the next. At his memorial service, which was held not in a church, but in the community center where his study group met, more than 300 people gathered. They came from 12 different states, different ages, different races, different backgrounds. United by a truth they'd learned from a retired truck driver who'd finally broken a cycle that had lasted 4 generations. They didn't mourn the way traditional funerals mourned. They celebrated. They shared stories of transformation. They spoke about the principles Marcus had taught them. They talked about cycles they'd broken, about manifestations they'd created, about the freedom they'd discovered. And at the end, they sang, not hymns from the Baptist hymnal, but a song Marcus had taught them, based on Jesus' actual words. I and the Father are one. The kingdom is within. I am the creator of my reality. I am awake. Mrs. Patterson spoke at the service, tears streaming down her face as she talked about how Marcus had changed her grandson's life, had given her family a future instead of another generation of prison and poverty. Timothy spoke about the observer who'd confirmed Marcus's teachings about the gift of seeing beyond the physical that was still developing. Dozens of others shared their own stories of healing, of manifestation, of awakening. And in the back of the room, though no one saw him arrive and no one saw him leave, the man from the diner stood watching. His ancient eyes were sad, but also pleased. Another cycle broken, another light activated, another ripple spreading through the collective consciousness of humanity. Marcus had done his part, had earned his rest, and the work would continue through those he'd taught, who would teach others, who would teach others, exponentially spreading until the day when institutional religion could no longer maintain its control, because too many people had remembered their true nature. The man left the memorial service and walked out into the night. He had other people to watch, other cycles to observe, other moments of readiness to witness. The awakening was still in its early stages. The resistance would be fierce, but the momentum was building. And once enough people remembered, once enough cycles were broken, once enough individuals claimed their divine power, nothing could stop the transformation. Jesus had planted the seed 2,000 years ago. It had been buried, hidden, nearly destroyed. But seeds are patient, and when the season is right, they grow. The season was right. The seed was growing, and Marcus Williams, retired truck driver, former Baptist choir member, man who'd driven 2.3 million miles in circles, had been one of the gardeners who'd helped it break through the soil and reach toward the light. What about you? Have you been living the same cycle, the same patterns, the same unanswered prayers? Have you felt trapped in a life that seems to repeat generation after generation without ever truly changing? If Marcus's story resonates with something deep inside you, it might be because you're ready. Ready to hear what Jesus actually taught before it was twisted into institutional control. Ready to discover that you're not powerless, not separate, not dependent on external authorities for access to the divine. Ready to break your own cycle and create a new pattern for those who come after you. The observers are watching. They're always watching. And when you're ready, truly ready, they'll appear. Maybe in a diner, maybe in a coffee shop, maybe in a garage while you're working on a car. The location doesn't matter. What matters is your readiness, your willingness to question, your hunger for truth, your courage to test principles instead of just believing doctrines. Marcus spent 30 years driving the same road before he was ready to see. How long have you been driving yours? And what would happen if you finally looked up and saw the man who's been sitting in the corner, watching, waiting for you to notice that something is wrong, that there's another way, that the cycle can be broken? Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications for more stories about people who've discovered what's been hidden for 2,000 years. Stories about cycles breaking and consciousness awakening and the return of Jesus' actual teachings. Because in the end, the greatest secret ever kept isn't about UFOs or ancient aliens or hidden technology. It's about you. It's about the power you carry, the divinity you embody, the creative force you've been taught to deny. And once you know, you can never unknow. Once you see, you can never unsee. Once you break free, you can never be imprisoned again. Marcus Williams drove through the same town 1,000 times before he finally understood. The man who never aged was waiting for him all along. And somewhere, right now, someone is waiting for you.